He was the one that actually recruited me out of prison to start speaking to Major League Baseball players about the dangers of gambling, organized crime, the relationships that they keep. And quite honestly, if it wasn't for Kevin, I don't know if I would have ever been a speaker. Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. Everything is very good, very blessed on this end. As always, I give God all the praise, honor, and glory and thanksgiving for that, and I really do mean that. Before we begin, I want to thank everybody who jumped onto our Mob Ties remade private call that we had, the private Zoom call. I think we had about 500 people on the call. It was tremendous, and for those of you that may still want to be involved, we're going to post the link. I think you can still get in it. It might be closed out at this point in time, but it's a tremendous platform, and we created a real community, a family, and people are getting a lot out of it. So today, my guest is somebody that's very special to me. He's a fellow by the name of Kevin Hallinan, and the reason he's special is because Kevin was the head of Major League Baseball security. He was the one that actually recruited me out of prison to start speaking to Major League Baseball players about the dangers of gambling, organized crime, the relationships that they keep. And quite honestly, if it wasn't for Kevin, I don't know if I would have ever been a speaker. And over the past 25 years, I've been very fortunate, very blessed to be a prolific speaker, speaking all over the world. I think some of you, at least, who are watching now have seen me in different places. I get messages all the time. But he's got a tremendously interesting story. He's got a great resume. He was involved in so many things on the law enforcement end, along with his activities in Major League Baseball. I want to read you a little bit about him, and he's got a tremendous book out. It's called Over the Wall. I really encourage you, suggest that you read it. For all those of you that are into, law enforcement, some of the the things that they faced, Major League Baseball, the contribution that he made to sports. It's extremely interesting, and I encourage you to read it. You can get it on Amazon. I think we'll have a link listed, or shown rather, in this video. Let me tell you a little bit about Kevin. Kevin Hallinan is known as an innovative leader in professional sports, security, and operations. Serving under 4 commissioners as the Senior Vice President of Security and Facility Management, Hallinan oversaw security for all 30 Major League Baseball clubs, creating revolutionary new systems to better protect the game and its players, and I was one of those revolutionary new systems. On USA Today's list of baseball's most influential people, Hallinan served as chairman of the Team Coalition and as a member of the New York State Policy Study Committee on Terrorism and the Police Executive Research Forum. Prior to MLB, Hallinan was commander of the FBI NYPD Joint Terrorism Task Force, where he was recognized for his contributions in the war on terrorism. He testified before the U.S. Congress on domestic terrorism and received numerous NYPD FBI citations and the U.S. Attorney General Award for Exceptional Public Service. Hallinan earned his collegiate degree at Fordham University in the Bronx and attended the FBI National Academy. Very interesting guy, and I can tell you this, he really was concerned about protecting Major League Baseball and, of course, the players. And the whole program that we were involved in for many, many years was geared to that. And I get very satisfactory information today about, our contribution to sports at that time. And Kevin did a heck of a lot more than just bring me in. Believe me, he was involved in the Olympics in 1984. He was head of security for that. He's just made tremendous contributions to pro sports in all of the leagues, because many of them followed his league in doing some of the things that he did, to help protect the players and the integrity of the sport. So without going any further, I want to introduce my good friend, Kevin Hallinan. All right, so here you are, Kevin. I just alerted my audience, as to my viewers, I should say, as to who you are and the fact that you have a terrific book out there entitled Over the Wall. I gave them a lot of background on you, your resume, your career. And I've been looking forward to this because, Kevin, I got to say this. I've been speaking now for just about 25 years. And in a big way, I owe it all to you because you were the one that got me started. And I want people to know how it all began, how I met you, what we did together. And I've told my wife this, I tell everybody, if it wasn't for Kevin Hallinan, I probably would never have been a speaker. And you started me off. So why don't you tell them how we met?
Okay. Well, what happened was when I initially joined Major League Baseball, I had in the first month or two that I was there, Peter Ueberroth asked me to address the Dodgers in spring training. And so I went to spring training and met with Tommy Lasorda and crew. And I talked to the players probably about 15, 20 minutes. And it seemed to be okay, but I came out of it thinking talking head really doesn't do it anymore. And quite honestly, a New York cop coming in here talking to players, I could see a lot of them, almost turning me off before I got started. So I knew I wanted to go in a new direction and I wanted to be proactive. That was really my part of who I am, both in law enforcement and in baseball. So what I did was my last assignment in law enforcement was the first commander of the FBI NYPD Joint Terrorism Task Force, the first in the country. And it was really a challenging assignment because we were bringing detectives together with agents who had been competitors for years. And building teamwork was a very interesting assignment. And fortunately, through the help of a lot of good people, it came together. And quite honestly, so good that they started creating. In fact, they asked me to be the national coordinator. And I was talking with baseball at the time, so the salary didn't match up very well. So it was baseball. But what happened was...
But Kevin, let me just stop you for a minute because it was very interesting. I think people don't understand how difficult it is or how there is so much competition between federal and state and city law enforcement agencies. And the task of bringing them all together must have been monumental. I know that couldn't have been easy.
Well, it wasn't, because what happened in the agreement that was signed by the commissioner and the director of the FBI, NYPD initially sent 10 detectives over to 26 Federal Plaza to work full time. And what happened, a small number of agents and several detectives refused the assignment. They couldn't do it. They just said there was too much had gone on in years past that wouldn't allow them. So we had to have people who were agreeing to be part of the team. And when I got over there, there was, interesting, the civilians that worked for the FBI, they would give you, oh, well, I'm sorry, I can't show you that. I have to speak with an agent, this kind of stuff. And it took time. And one of the things that happened, we got involved in a major shootout at the Whitestone Motel with a group that had doing armed robberies and did a major burglary of a gun collector and took out all of his weaponry and came to the Bronx to sell it to a terrorist group. They were meeting us and they didn't know it. And 36 shots later, we made the arrest and got things done. But what most important was bringing the agents and detectives together in the planning as to how we were going to do it. And this teamwork, if you will, I could see was slowly, they were starting to partner up together. There were agents who were asking me, could I work with this detective? It was like picking a girlfriend, Michael. It was really something. A sociologist would have had a terrific time with it. But having said that, a lot of FBI high-ranking people came to New York to find out, is this happening? Is it going on? And will it be successful? Well, it took time. A lot of major things happened. A Brinks robbery up in Rockland County with 11 of these folks came in and killed 2 police officers and a bank guard. And we got into safe houses and we found explosives and everything like that. It's a whole story that's in the book. But what happened was the ranking people were really pleased at how this was coming together and started to add people to it and resources. Now, because of them coming to New York, I got to meet them. Well, one of them ended up the second ranking agent in the FBI, who became a good friend. He stayed closely in touch with me. So when I got to baseball, after that Dodger experience, I called him and I took a trip to DC, and I sat down with him and I said, look, here's what I need. I need somebody, and he has to be the right person, to accompany me to meet with major league players and talk about the challenges their careers face from organized crime, gambling, drugs, women, et cetera, et cetera. Organized crime is the whole package. If I could get them prepared and have an understanding of how organized crime goes about it, they would be, more importantly, much better prepared to deal with it. Well, what happened was he said, okay, here's the deal. I'll get you an agent who is pretty close, has people that he was working with, and we'll get you somebody. Well, he did. And the first one I met with, and you'll get a laugh out of this because you knew him well, or certainly knew of him, Henry Hill was the first one I met with. I'll never forget it. I took him to lunch with the agent in Los Angeles. And I have to tell you, it was an experience. Henry Hill's conversation, every second word began with F. So I said, this guy's not going to make it in front of the camera. I want somebody, and I told the agent, somebody who's, I use the word articulate, but I said somebody who can talk, who they're going to trust and say, oh, this guy's getting it over. He understands, and he's able to explain just what the challenge is. Well, the next name up was Michael Franzese. And I don't recall that agent's name, but you knew him pretty well. He was a guy that you knew. And unfortunately, at that time, you were somewhat unavailable. I think it was called Lompoc.
Correct. I was in the hole in Lompoc.
Exactly. And we, as you recall, were working out a deal with you to get you out and a hotel stay and et cetera, et cetera. And an earthquake happened to come along. And
I'll never forget, Kevin, I was all set to come. And it was a Monday morning when the earthquake hit, and that stopped all movement for the Bureau of Prisons. That was it.
Yes, and that was it for us too. So we were kind of stuck. By the way, I should say that I was looking for MLB to do this production. Michael, I'll tell you now, because many years have gone by, I got $50,000 from each one of the professional leagues. I had to go before the NFL, the NBA, National Hockey League, and of course my own commissioner, who really, didn't believe what I was up to. And I convinced him. And what I did was, my first stop was, I'll never forget it, the NBA and David Stern. And I went over to the NBA, and they had all their top brass at the front of this meeting room. And we're just about to get started, and David Stern walks in. And he sits down, and I'm at the podium there and ready to go. And I did about 4 minutes, and Stern stands up and says, "We're in," and walks out.
Just like
everybody was shocked. He understood what I was talking about, the difference that it could make with the players and understanding the threat. This was going to be something special. So what happened was, in the Major League Baseball was ill-equipped to do this, if you will, major motion picture that I was creating, because I said, I don't want an Army training film. I want something that has a good script, has good people in it who are going to be attractive to the audience, including good looking women. And I said, we're going to have good music. It's going to be something special. Long story short, though, Michael, it was put up for a Monitor Award. That's how good it was. I don't even know if you ever saw it.
No, I did see it. It was, yeah, you edited it down to about 20, 25 minutes, but it just moved so quickly. And I was kind of shocked when I saw it, because you featured me all the way through from beginning to end.
That's exactly right. In your prison uniform, I might add.
Yes. I guess that made it more effective at the time, right?
And probably so. And it was a showstopper when I brought that into spring training, because again, I realized a picture speaks 1,000 words. And they were frozen in their seats. That started me over almost, well, it was 20 years. Every spring training, I met with 30 clubs, and it was showtime, it was entertainment, and it was about what the challenges they were facing. And that video set the stage, and then the other leagues, because if you recall, we made the athlete somewhat generic. So you didn't know whether he was a basketball player or a football player, whatever. We did have some storylines there with Rose and a couple others, but we had the other leagues were represented, and they got the exact same response that I got. The commissioners they said, this is the way to go. At that time, Michael, these players were the MTV generation.
Yeah.
And it was so important to come through that. And you truly, if there was an Academy Award at that time for these films, you would have got it, because it was you that really made it happen. They were looking, you know what I said, Michael, and I apologize before saying it. When people asked me about it, when I was interviewed about it, I said, having Michael Franzese as almost part of my team now was like kidnapping, finding, capturing an enemy general, because I was getting the full battle plan that was going to help me deploy strategies. And Michael was part of the team. He was looking to make good things happen. And the players, I mean, I had to stop the players. They were looking for your autograph. It was unbelievable. And I always gave you, if you recall, a very suspenseful opening. I kind of kept you out of sight until it was time.
Oh, Kevin, I don't know if you remember this. You probably do. There was one time, I forget what team it was, but you had me pull up they were in a tent. You remember that? And you had me pull up in a limousine, and you had two guys that they were cops, but they looked like they were mob guys. And you had me walk out of there into the tent. Kevin, you could have heard a pin drop. It was like, oh my God, these guys were scared.
Michael, it was a media tent that had been left up, and I was able to use it. And yes, you're absolutely right. The tent had a flap. The place was dark except for the monitor that we had. Larry Walker, who's in the Hall of Fame, and Walt Weiss, who was a Rockland County guy, were sitting in the front row. And they said, when that flap opened and that car, the timing of it was perfect. This black limo pulls up, and you, in the dark glasses, they open the door for you, and you come in. Larry Walker and Walter Weiss said they thought they were going to get hit. Everybody was, you're absolutely right. It was probably one of the greatest moments of the 30 shows. That tent and you coming in at that time, holy mackerel.
And I don't know if you remember, I remember the words that you were talking about me. It was all dark. And then you just said, and here he is now. And that's when the tent opened and I walked down the aisle. And these guys, you could see it on their faces. They were scared. It was funny.
Michael, if you recall, when I used you in the Rookie Career Development Program in Lansdowne, Virginia, the Management Center, which is a beautiful place, the other speakers and the Second City group, the actors group from Chicago that we used for the storylines and on-stage stuff for the players, when they saw what I would do with you, where I would have you, you'd come into the hotel and you'd go direct to your room. We'd feed you in your room. It said so. Yeah. When it came showtime, everybody was already in place in class, and we brought you backstage, and we had a podium. And the way we did it was we had the curtain closed and just the podium. And I showed the video to set the stage, Gambling with Your Life. And then I come on the stage, on the center of the stage, and I would say to them, this afternoon, and I'd start walking as I was saying it, this afternoon, you are going to meet, I go down the stairs, I'm on the side aisle, I still got the microphone, you're going to meet someone who would be the most dangerous person you ever met in your career. Now I'm almost at the back of the room. And as I get just at the back room, I say, he's here today. And then I point to the stage, and my guys have you staged behind the podium, and you arise like you're coming up from the dead. You come up, and the silence in the place, and at times you would have the leather jacket on and the glass. When the first time you did the Rookie Career Development Program, Don Fear and Gene Orza were there, and I thought they were going to have a heart attack, and you were going, and you still had them in stun signs for over 45 minutes, and Orza, with fear whispering in his ear, comes over to me and says, let him go as long as he wants. And I'll have to tell you, every presentation that you made at the Rookie Career Development Program, we had probably 15, 18 speakers over those 3.5 days. You were #1 rated every single appearance that you made in Rookie Career Development Program. They had you as #1. And then it was like Saturday afternoon at the confessional to line it up to talk to you. I mean, yeah. Michael, you were a showstopper.
Well, you know what, Kevin, I remember that. It was a great time. I mean, really, I enjoyed it so much. And, you know, the most satisfying thing is I think we really educated those guys and put the fear of doing some wrong things. Because I remember we talked to them, obviously, about the dangers of gambling. And we knew there were some issues going on there. And then the relationships that they keep, how they had to be careful, who was giving them gifts or putting their arm around them and trying to get close to them. And just, you know, really putting them on their guard, which they needed to be. And I like to think it was a very successful program.
Michael, another thing that you brought up, which was always a danger, was the issue with women who were targeting them. Yeah. And how all that worked. And believe me, that was critical education. There was one more appearance that you made that was an absolute showstopper. And it's the first time it ever happened. And I was fortunate. I was the producer and director. I created a professional sports security symposium. Mm-hmm. In Lansdowne, Virginia again, and I got the NFL, hockey, basketball, and I allowed soccer in as well to come to it. But what they had to do was I wanted all of their security people coming to the program. All of ours, all 4 leagues, 5 leagues were bringing their security people there. And the way I had it set up was the Chicago security people guys from all the leagues would sit together. The New York guys would sit together. Cross-fertilization, to get to talk to each other, know each other. So even in the off season, they would be able to exchange information and intelligence as to what was going on out there. That day, we had you and his name, you probably know, Gino Bonavallata or something.
Yeah.
He was the head of organized crime for the FBI.
And was Joe Pistone there at that
Joe
time?
Pistone was there.
Yes.
You know,
He was there.
Joe Pistone.
That's when I first met him outside of, when I met him in the life. Yeah, and I remember looking at Joe because I had only met him one time on the street with somebody. Thank God for that. I'm glad I didn't meet him more on the street. But I said to him after that, I said, Joe, you know what? You look more like the mob guy than I do. The way he talked and his mannerisms. And, we became very good friends from that day forward until today. I love the guy.
He was extremely helpful to me, and he agreed. And can you imagine a cast having yourself, the head of the FBI organized crime? I'm mispronouncing his name, Bonapolano or something. Like that.
Yeah.
He was there, and Pistone, who had done all those years undercover for the FBI, and made a terrific movie, by the way.
Yes, very good.
The movie was excellent. And they, if you recall, we set up a bar scene where a player and his girlfriend came in.
Yes.
And you guys were at a table, and you're going to buy him a drink. I mean, the whole setup was absolutely terrific. And the FBI director actually came to the program on the last day, and he couldn't believe what the agenda that we had, and the fact that we had the leagues talking together for the first time in history. Unfortunately, I would hope that something would come back again. But again, the sharing of information, I always let the other leagues know my safe is open. I'm not hiding anything. If I find something that works, I want you guys to be part of it. So they made me, if you will, the team leader for professional sports security, any kind of interviews. In fact, believe it or not, cricket came over from England. This was the international cricket came over and wanted to talk about what they could do they had gambling problems big time. And they met with me. And then about a month or two later, they flew me over to London, England, to the Lord's cricket place in London with all the international owners. And I talked to them. In fact, I showed them Gambling with Your Life. I talked about you and how important it was, if they were ever to find somebody like you, that it could make a major difference. Because, law enforcement talking about it, security talking about it is one thing. A guy who lived it, knew the life, knew what it took, made a difference.
Well, I can tell you this, Kevin, as a result, and you had a flair for the dramatic for sure, but it was necessary. You got to make an impression, and you always set it up that way. But as a result of that work that you did, it was 2 or 3 years later that the NCAA got in touch with me, and I started doing the same. We created a video there, and I probably spoke to 300 Division I and II universities, all of the student athletes. And it's a great program. I only stopped doing, I still do it every once in a while. I've been to Alabama, Nick Saban recently, but because it was so much work, I couldn't just handle it anymore. But, and also, I was also called to Europe. I went to just outside of London, I forget the city, Coventry, and we did a big, symposium there for security. And one of the gentlemen involved in that, I'm actually speaking for a bunch of people. I think it's a class, I think he's teaching now. In the next couple of days, I'm speaking to that, through Zoom. So it's lasted, it went on. And I have to tell you, I've met a lot of the retired ball players that we spoke to. And they always say, hey, I remember you, and Kevin brought you in, and they always have the story. I hear it for years and years and years. So it was so satisfying, and I think we really, I appreciate you bringing me aboard. And like I said, Kevin, that's what started my speaking career. I mean, I never even thought of speaking. I don't know if you remember this, but you had said to me, I want you to come to speak to the players. And I said, well, I don't do that. I never did anything like that. And you said, oh, come on, big tough mob guy, you're afraid to speak to a couple of players? And I said, all right, set it up, I'm coming. That's kind of how it started, and a great experience.
Michael, what was really terrific about you, you never disappointed me. All the different setups I had for you with clubs where you had to travel, and you were always there. And that's why I know we had a couple of broken dates for this podcast, but I kept telling my writer, let me tell you something. It may be January of next year. Michael is going to come through. I know this is going to happen. I have so much confidence and faith in him. I mean, I'd go anywhere, that you need me, and you knew it, and I knew it, and that we became very close. We spent, gee whiz, up in that beautiful suite they used to give me. We had more conversations, and the police officers who were working as resident security agents, as part-time security consultants for baseball, they just thought you were, I don't want to be dropping names, but so many of them always ask me, what about Michael? What's going on? How's he doing? Et cetera, et cetera. So it was just a relationship that was so strong, and the benefits of it were just unbelievable. You, and I can tell you, Michael, most sincerely, you were a difference maker. I tried in my small way in law enforcement and in baseball to do that, because there was really nothing better than being able to save a career and have people think twice about what they were going to do. And having somebody like you in my corner, it didn't get any better.
Well, listen, I'm ever grateful for that opportunity and experience. And I'll mention one more thing. When we used to go into restaurants, if you remember, you always would sit with your back to the wall. We laughed about that. Yeah, we laughed about that quite a bit. It was funny. But anyway, great experience, and one that I'll never forget. And it's nothing but good memories. But let's move on, because Kevin, your career is, I don't even know where to begin, but nobody knows the streets of New York and the dynamics that are going on in New York, or that went on, better than you. And I'd like to talk about I say pre-Giuliani, because I'll tell you one experience. You remember New York in the 70s, 60s and 70s, especially Times Square. It was dangerous. It was nothing but peep shows and pornography. And I'll never forget, Kevin, when I was in prison, they were bringing me back into New York in the 90s for a parole violation. And I was with the marshals. We were in the car, and Giuliani had been mayor for quite some time. And they said to me, Michael, we have time before we have to get you to court. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I haven't been around the city for a while. I've been out of commission. I said, let's take a drive. And I said, and I'd like a cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee, So the marshals, they were cool. So they took me into Times Square, and Kevin, I could not believe the renovation. I said, the city is what it always should have been, but I never saw it in my entire lifetime. So maybe you could talk about, what went on prior to that, and how the city was, and how you had a big part in cleaning it up, and really what went on there.
Well, Michael, I started out, again, originally born and bred in the South Bronx, and went into policing at 22, and I went to a place, 20th Precinct on West 68th Street. So we covered the west side of Manhattan, and it was a very interesting place to break in, because you had Central Park West, and you had West End Avenue and Riverside Drive. It was money, but also there was crime, and plenty of it. There were drugs, and indeed 84th Street between Columbus and Amsterdam was posted by the Daily News as the worst block in the city. We had 2 police cars in a block. We had we couldn't control it. Gun battles, drugs, just the worst. It got so bad that the city totally gave up on it, and they tore down both sides of the street and put up a high school just off the corner of Columbus Avenue, went halfway into the block on one side, and a junior high school on the other side. because they had no way of curing this crime, no matter how many police they put in there. Well, the 20th was a good place to work. I was there 7 years looking to be a detective, a lot of arrests, etc. They sent me, I don't know whether it was a reward or a punishment, to Brooklyn and working 7-3 and 7-5, 6 to 2 in the morning, make an arrest. I made more arrests. I tell you, I spent more time in court than most lawyers. And I got to know the DAs. And that's another story we get into, but I ended up 2-5 squad. East Harlem was my first assignment as a detective. And I was only there a couple of months. 3:30 in the morning, a shooting. Guy is shot 5 times. Police got there, I should say, almost got there, they told me, which turned out later not to be true. So 3:30 in the morning off 117th Street and First, okay? So being that close to Pleasant Avenue, I figured, Pleasant Avenue's got something to do with this. So I worked really hard in this case, and sure enough, I come up with a every Wednesday night at 3:30, or I should say morning, I would be there with one of my partners, just looking, seeing who might be able to be a witness. Was a delivery truck? Was it this? Patsy's. You remember Patsy's on First Avenue there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I interviewed him. I'll never forget it. And he says, he says, because it was known that he would sit outside his restaurant to the early hours of the morning. And I went with my partner and Patsy, and I go through the thing, and he says, "Oh, yeah, I hear you. But there's a bigger truck come by, big truck, and it's slow, it went very slow." He says, as the truck goes, the next thing I saw some police cars coming, so I don't know what happened. Yeah, the big truck, that kept him from being a witness. But anyway, this kid told me the story. He had seen the shooting. What happened, the guy was running up the block, Desiderio Caban by name, running up the block, looking over his shoulder, and this car comes around a corner, gets him probably just 50, 80 feet before he hits First Avenue on 117, and the driver gets out of the car and puts 5 in his back. The two guys jump back in the car, take off. Now the kid tells me that this police car, there was a cop sitting in a car by the Delightful Coffee Shop. You remember the Delightful on 60 and First? Yeah. So anyway, one cop's getting coffee. So this guy's sitting in the car and he hears the shots and he sees the car come out. He chases the car. Now he told me at the hospital that the car stalled and he couldn't get close to the car and the car got away. The kid tells me the police car was almost on the bumper. Okay. So I got the case. I'm brand new in the squad. And I have to tell you, Mike, there was a little intrigue in that squad. They were wondering who I was, and there wasn't a lot of help. So, but I was persistent. I went to the social clubs. I went to the bars, rails. I mean, I was there. I had a presence. I wasn't going away. Well, I got a phone call. The voice on the other end says, "Arnie the Animal. That's who you want. Quick." Arnie the Animal turned out to be Arnold Squitieri. I don't know if you ever met Arnold Squitieri.
I did.
And his compatriot Al Francisco. Alley Boy. Yes, those two. So they were the ones responsible. So again, I was pushing real hard. I wasn't giving up. Well, one night I come into work and the detective says, "Hey, there's 2 guys in the back who want to talk to you." So the only guys who went in the back were police officers or, state troopers. It had to be FBI, whoever. I go back there, and this guy in a pinstripe suit, grayish hair, nice looking man, he's staring at me as I come in the door of this room. And there's a fat guy, big fat guy who I recognize. The fat guy is Fats Anguisi from Pleasant Avenue, major drug dealer. Okay. And who's sitting, but the owner of Rayo's is sitting in the chair looking at me. Okay. Vincent Rayo. And Rayo says to me, "Look, you're getting in the way of our friends. You're very aggressive. You can't. These people are good people. They're our friends. You have to stay away from them. It's such. And I'm standing there, listen to this guy. And next thing, Anguisi leans over the desk and he says, "Kid, this case is going to be worth telephone numbers to you." And I stood back and I said, "The only thing I want in this case is Arnold, Squitieri, and Siska in this precinct to be fingerprinted and booked for homicide, put in a police wagon and down to court. That's all I want. But the next thing I want is I want the two of you out of here now." And they were going out, and Rayo, he went out in a hurry. Fats was kind of shaking his ass, looking around. So I gave him a kick in the ass to speed up his path out of the squad room. And out they went. Well, I guess about 2 weeks later, I get a call from a former assistant district attorney. And I want to see if you know this name. Gino Galena, Manhattan DA's office. He was the homicide DA. Good-looking Italian. He was a naval officer, actually, when he was in the service, and very sharp. And they thought he was obviously going to be a big guy in the DA's office. Well, it turned out that he didn't get the promotion. They gave it to John Keenan. I don't know if you remember that name. He became a federal judge. Yeah. Galena calls me up. "Hey, Kev, how you doing? Okay, yeah. Look, we're going to surrender Squitieri and Siska." "Oh, okay, good. All right. How about either tomorrow or Friday, right in front of 100 Center Street?" I said, "Gino, no good." "What do you mean, no good?" I said, "Look, I know what you're going to do. You're going to have your press conference there. You've been in the papers that these two guys were framed by a young detective. Fortunately, you didn't mention my name, but that I paid off this kid that became the witness and all this kind of stuff." Meanwhile, Michael, I have to tell you that IAD and the NAP Commission were looking at this case, and they got word about the cops doing some business on Pleasant Avenue when that car went around, and they're believing that I got a piece of the action to let those guys go or not investigate the case. And I got the word IAD wanted to talk to me, but they were kind of afraid I was going to come in with a lawyer and maybe screw things up. So I sent the word to IAD. "I'll come in. I'll talk to you, and just me." I had given my heart and soul to this case, and I get there. And I go down to IAD in Brooklyn. I'll never forget it. The sergeant and lieutenant, they cross-examined me for about 3 hours, and I spoke because again I had it all inside what I did, and they're shaking their head. And next thing, the lieutenant goes to the phone. And he comes back in, he says, "Oh, we got one more thing for you." And I had made sergeant by that time. And he says, "You got to, they want you to over at Manhattan District Attorney's Office, the Rackets Bureau." I said, "Well, I got a 412. No, you don't worry about the 412. You go with us." So we go downstairs, and I'll never forget it. They get in the car, open up the door, and I'm in the back seat. Mike, I felt like a prisoner. I says, "Look at this." Again, heart and soul. I mean, I was determined. Anyway, I get there, and this young district attorney, never forget it, he had a full head of fuzzy hair, big glasses, and they go in, they talk to him, they leave me outside, then they call me in 5 minutes later, and I sit down in front of his desk. And he does the same cross-examination that I just went through with the sergeant and lieutenant. And I said, "Hey, whatever I got." So again, I pour it all out, et cetera, et cetera. So I get on, I guess, maybe 35 minutes. So he says to me, and he kind of leans into me, he says, "Look, here's the deal. You are going to wear a wire, and you're going to go back to that precinct and that detective squad, and you're going to engage these guys in conversation and talk and gather information, and then you'll come back and sit down with me." And I was backing up in my chair listening to him. And then I leaned into him and I said, okay, I'll do it. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to wear a wire, and I want you to go to your lawyer friends, the judges, and all the people you interact with. And then the two of us will come back here and share information. And he looks at me like, this guy is crazy. And I could see this Lieutenant Hess, I'll never forget it, at the corner of his eye. Was supposed to be a real tough guy. I could see almost a little smile that this guy's got, forgive me, balls. And I ended up, he stands up behind his desk and he says, we're finished here. And I walked out. Michael, like I say, they ended up getting this guy, Bill Phillips. You remember that name, Knapp Commission star witness. They wired him up and got him into the 2-5. And he was taking money himself. And that's why they had him wear the wire. They were putting me in the same class. They talked to the cops that were involved. And sure enough, they had stopped the car on Pleasant Avenue. And Squitieri and Siska talked their way out. And this one cop says those famous words, he's good people. And Squitieri says, don't worry, Siska, we're going to take care of you. We're going to take care of you. And away they go. And they tell Phillips the story. And Phillips says to him, he's wearing a wire. And I was recording this conversation in the locker room because he was kidding about the money they made. And Phillips says to this cop, the guy who was the leader of these three, what about that kid up in the squad? What's Hallinan getting on this? And what had happened was the morning of the shooting, I was in the squad room doing all the reports. It was like 9 o'clock. I had been in court all day. And as a favor to one of the detective sergeants, he asked me to work the night duty as well. I hadn't gotten any sleep. I was whipped. And I'm knocking out this typewriter at 9:30 in the morning. And this detective, cop in a 2-5, who always used to come into the squad, and because I had a white shield for a long time before they gave me the gold shield, I had finally gotten it about a month before. He says, he walks over to the desk and I'm typing. He says, hey, hotshot, you gonna break this case? You gonna be the man? You're gonna get second grade, not third grade. You're getting second grade. And I just stopped typing, Mike. And I leaned back on my chair and then I leaned into him. And I said, you can bet your ass I'm going to break this case. Michael, he turned white as a sheet. And he got up from his chair. And I'm thinking, what did I say? What did I say? And he backed up to the gate and he walked out and took off. I drove home that morning, and what kept me awake from hitting the tree, what did I say? Why did he react? I did not know that he was the cop who pulled up on Pleasant Avenue and said, he's good people, and was the leader of this taking you the money and letting these guys walk on the homicide. What happened was, not only did I get Squitieri and Siska, but those three cops got locked up as well. That's another story I won't drag you through, but I was being looked at. But what happened, Gino Galena, who came in to the precinct, sure enough, with these two guys, okay, and he left. He was driving a pink Cadillac that some pimp had given him because he couldn't pay his fee. And he took two guys, and I fingerprint Squitieri. I'll never forget it. I take him to wash his hands in the men's room. Now he's got cuffs on his hands, his wrists, and he's wiping his hands. And he's a big burly guy, if you remember him. And I'm kind of leaning against the wall watching him, and I'm thinking, Michael, this case took over 2 years that I was running with this thing. And let me tell you, there was a lot of intrigue, as you can imagine, because OC was involved. And I looked down at him. I said, Arnold, 2 years. And he's wiping his hands. He looks up at me and he says, F you. And I looked at him and I said, Arnold, you're right, because I'm really the only one who cared about this case. And I walked out.
Well, you know,
Intrigued from that, but I'll close at there.
let me ask you this, because, you know, back in the day, people asked me, you know, was the police department corrupt? Did you guys work with politicians? And, you know, and I said to them, I said, let me try to paint a picture for you. You know, we had 5 families. We had 750 made guys that actually took the oath. We had a lot of associates. I says, many times we had a neighbor, a relative that was part of, you know, the police department. So we got involved. I mean, I got involved with a few guys to do a couple of things, but, you know, they always say, was organized crime really so hooked up or involved in the police department? I said, no, we didn't control the departments. But yeah, there was guys that we got friendly with and did our bidding with, and sometimes paid some money. You know, if we had a gambling operation, we paid them a few bucks to keep the look the other way. There was stuff like that. In your experience, did you witness a lot of organized crime involvement, or, you know, from our guys, involvement in the department?
Yes. And what I just one postscript, if you will. A year later, Gino Galena was found, his body on a Greenwich Village street, shot 7 times with 2 guns, 42 years old, DOA. He gave up that career with DA's office and went into organized crime, representing these guys, and got himself killed. But getting back to, yes, there was one of the reasons I was in uniform for 7 years was because I turned down 3 different times to go to what they called plain clothes, which was vice, which was gambling, which was prostitution, etc. And there were rumors, in some cases more than rumors, that there was a bonus, if you will, getting into the vice unit. Again, not everybody, but there were connections to organized crime who had these guys on a monthly of taking care of them to, you know, give them some room to operate.
Yeah, well, look, that was my experience, and I try to tell people, listen, the whole police department is not corrupt. I mean, most of these guys do their job and do it properly, and we need them, obviously, but there were times when we had relationships and we were able to work deals and you know, get some favorable treatment. It just happened. There was one precinct, Kevin, I can share it with you, 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, when everybody else was gone, they would allow me to go up there and look through their files and records in case there was anything in there that I should know in advance. And, you know, we had those relationships, but it wasn't, you know, as widespread as some people think. But let me ask you this, Kevin, what's going on today? You know, this whole defund the police movement and all of this radical stuff now that's kind of ravaging New York. People are shocked when I say to them, defunding the police is the most ridiculous, insane thing I've ever heard. We need law enforcement on the street to protect us. And obviously, we're seeing the result of some of these radical progressive movements today. Crime is going crazy. I mean, New York, LA, Chicago, I never witnessed anything like this when I was on the street. But what I'm seeing now, I don't understand the mentality. What is your feeling on it?
Well, it's unfortunately, clearly, there have been incidents where the police acted inappropriately, and they have to be held accountable and should. But that accountability has to go right up the line. I was really shocked at that incident where the 5 police officers ended up beating a motorist, actually a guy who had gotten away from them earlier, and just the 5 of them just beat him to death. And nobody stepped up or anything like that. My question right off the bat was, where was the sergeant on patrol? Okay, where was the sergeant? Where was the lieutenant on patrol? And the police chief was still in office. I don't know whether she still is or not. She was given a pass. And I understand she had previously been in Atlanta and had been dismissed, and she was given. So they 5 police officers and absolutely should be held accountable for it. But there has to be a follow-up. There has to be an examination of what happened in each instance. The same thing with the officer who, George Floyd, standing on his neck or knee on his neck, and ends up killing him. Where was the sergeant on patrol? What was happening there? They had 2 other police officers there. I think one had 3 days on the job, another one had a couple of months. Accountability. How can this happen? But let me also say, on the police side of it, there has to be a really complete look at the police, their training, how they go about their business. And I worked with an anti-crime unit after I made sergeant up in the Bronx, right off the Grand Concourse, very busy place. And those police officers, we went out, it was me and there were 6 or 7 police officers, and we were a team. And I have to tell you, anti-crime in the New York City Police Department were the Marines of the police department. They were terrific police officers, and they did a great job. They had they had a shooting some years back that ended up, they broke up because they were making too many arrests. It turned out to be an issue, too many arrests. But the police themselves have to be, they're walking away from the job in numbers that you wouldn't believe. And they're retiring. And unfortunately, they're not getting the support. They're not getting the salaries either. And police agencies, and I spoke with a lieutenant from the police academy, and she told me that cities throughout the United States she says we get probably 20 to 30 communiques from police departments throughout the United States wanting to know who can they contact that's leaving, that's going, that has a good record, etc. And they are leaving. And I can tell you, the police in Rockland County, Clarkstown Police Department, they're good for, well, with overtime, probably over 175,000 or something like that. I mean, and this is not only them, it's throughout the United States. These salaries are going up. In New York City, they're not getting anything near that. And obviously the danger that they're facing, there's a lot of work that has to be done. But Michael, I believe that they can turn it around. I remember with the Knapp Commission and all that went on with the corruption. I think that this can be turned around, but it's going to take leadership. And also, we got to have some district attorneys that will do their job. As you know, the frustration of locking them up and they walk out that day for serious crime. So that has to be looked at. And what it should be on a state-by-state basis, the training and, quite honestly, listing of police officers who got jammed up should not be allowed again into policing. Those records should be kept, no question about it. And they should look at this immunity, what do they call it? Qualified immunity, taking it away from the police. That's horrific. For me or any other police officer at the time to go into a situation and make a judgment and then be held guilty because we made the wrong decision. Well, what they had a place called Combat City up in City Island at the police range, and it was a building, and they would bring not only police officers in there and set up scenes, they bring judges and lawyers, etc. And it'd be called shoot or don't shoot. Well, let me tell you, more judges and lawyers kill people in Combat City than any police officer. The dangers that you face, and it's expect the unexpected. I couldn't tell you how many times we walked in. And again, in those days, it was different. My partner and I, 85th Street, never forget it, transient hotel, meet complainant. That was the call. We get there, it's a young woman. She said, my boyfriend just beat me up, etc., etc. He's up in the room now. He's sleeping. I said, oh, okay, all right, we'll go up. Yeah. She says, oh, by the way, he has a gun underneath the pillow and it's loaded and he hates cops. Me and my partner go up. We got a key to the room. Okay. Tiptoed, opened up the door very, very quiet. And the two of us charged in. He jumped on top of him and I went for the pillars. And sure enough, there was the loaded gun. And he told it. I was talking with my partner about this about a year ago. This guy said to us in the precinct, "You two are so lucky because I got to that gun, I would have blown you up." I mean, that's what it was like. And it was just another arrest, okay? But that's what you expect. You have to, again, go into this job knowing that there's going to be some very difficult times, but you're going to meet some unbelievable people and you're going to get to work with men and women. For me, it was both the FBI and the NYPD that allowed me to have the career that I had. And I do believe it was a book, really, that I worked for McGraw-Hill when I got out of high school. And somebody threw a book on my desk about a police officer that wrote a book, and it was an unbelievable book. And what he talked about, the job, the interesting parts of the job, the danger and the rewards. And I have to tell you, that's what got me in. And I'm hoping to some degree, young people, men and women, get to read that book and consider it a career, because believe me, it's all about service and it's all about making a difference. And that's the way I always looked at it.
I know you to be that person, Kevin. And let me ask you, what motivated you to write the book, Over the Wall? Terrific book, great reviews, and power-packed with information and a lot of very interesting things that you talk about. What motivated you?
Well, you know what it was? I wanted police officers to realize, men and women, about the opportunities that law enforcement presented, and that it wasn't a dead end, that you could build a career. I mean, I talk about, obviously, I was sent to New Orleans to work with the New Orleans Police Department. They sent me to the FBI Academy. I worked with, again, the FBI, the director, or I should say the police commissioner, called me and said, "You're going to be new commander of the FBI Terrorist Task Force." And I told him, I didn't even know there was a terrorist task force. He says, "Well, you're going to make it happen." And then to top it all off, Michael, I gave a talk on domestic terrorism at the St. Regis Hotel. It was for the ASIS, the American Society of Industrial Security. And there was about 150 attendees. And I spoke about the task force, what we had accomplished, the challenges that we faced, etc. And the Olympics were coming up, and there were two gentlemen, security people for Sports Illustrated and Time Inc. that were in the audience. And when I finished, they came up to me and said, "Hey, we need you to talk to our board of directors. We haven't even thought of this Olympic challenge." Because, Mike, if you recall, in '84, Peter Ueberroth, the way he created the Olympics was to have 30 major sponsors, the first time ever that the Olympics made money, a lot of money. Well, Sports Illustrated was one of the 30. They wanted me to speak with their board of directors, and I talked with the head of the FBI and Peter, and they said, "Sure, Kev, go up, tell them what the story is." So I went up and I told them, "Look, we have no information. I'm not giving out state secrets of a threat to the Olympics at this point in time. You have a security director. We'll be in touch if anything is going on." So the head, and I can't think of his name, is a famous guy with Sports Illustrated at that time, told the security director, "We're not going to the Olympics without this guy." Because what happened was a frogman who was hired by the Sports Illustrated, they had a 5-star luxury liner in San Pedro, which they were bringing in these CEOs and chairman of the boards and everything like that. 2 days, 2 nights, 3 days, and going to the different venues. And they had 6 mansions in Beverly Hills. All these people were coming in. They wanted a security team, etc. Sports Illustrated came after me. I said, "I got a full-time job." I had to call the director of the FBI and the police commissioner, and they said, "Kev, if you don't go, we're going to go." They say, "You go." I was on full, they made me take my vacation time and all that, and I did. And I, quite honestly, Mike, made a lot of money. And I realized that the internship, if you will, that I did in law enforcement gave me this great opportunity with Major League Baseball. And I believe not that it's going to be baseball for everybody, but clearly the experience and education. I got my college degree while I was in the police department from Fordham University. So I did it. And my brother did the same thing. He ended up with Verizon, a security chief for Verizon, 15 years, traveling all over the world. There are opportunities there. It's not a one-way street, and it's there. And again, nobody would have bought stock in me at 22 years old. I wasn't going anyplace. I found myself in the New York City Police Department and made something of it.
Well, Kevin, listen, you've made a tremendous contribution to the city of New York and really all over the world. What you did with pro sports, it was extremely innovating, I should say. And I know you played a big role in security back in '84 with the Olympics. I remember that, specifically. And you wrote a masterful book, terrific. The reviews have been great. What I've read of it, I really enjoyed. I'm going to finish it up. And it's just a pleasure knowing you, Kevin. I mean it. You've had a big impact on my life.
Michael, I've been very, very fortunate. I think everybody kind of wondered, the people that were interested in the security chief's job with baseball were the head of Secret Service and the marshals and former U.S. attorneys. And Ugroth hired me, and my writer asked him, we interviewed him for the book, and he asked him, why Kevin? He said, he says, Kevin came in and he had this diversified background of policing where he was interacting with people on the everyday problems that people run into. And Kevin seemed to thrive on that he was there to make a difference in those situations. And he was about service. And the same thing with the FBI. But there was some folks wondering, I was, FBI commander of the terrorist task force. And they say, why do you need this guy? Well, then, of course, 9/11 happened. And baseball clearly was at risk. Yeah. And I was there with George Bush, who it turned out was a very close friend of mine because he was an owner of the Rangers. Yes. He came to all the ownership meetings, and he and I became friends. And I'll tell you what, it was almost embarrassing at times when there'd be situations where the owners would be meeting or something, and I would be there coming as a security chief, and he'd yell out, Kevin, and come running at me. And he wrote me a letter. I'll never forget it. I came out of my house and the postman is coming down my driveway, and I say, what's going on? So this big brown envelope that said, Washington, D.C., the White House. And I look at the postman, I said, is this my draft notice? What's going on here? And I open it up. And it's a letter from President Bush about my retirement and what I meant to baseball. And I tell you, I really was struck by what he said. And quite honestly, when I retired, the communications that I got from people throughout baseball, and Oral Hershiser, I never forget it, about just a couple of years ago, it was my birthday, and somebody wished me happy birthday on Facebook. And Oral Hershiser wrote on Facebook, Kevin Hallinan, he always cared about us. And that's what it was about. I really, truly cared about them. I wasn't waiting for autographs or anything like that. But as I told them, they played baseball from the earliest part of their life, and they had got to the top of their profession, and they just worked too hard. So every presentation I made at spring training for almost 20 years, it was always titled Protecting Your Career. And I think the players understood, because let me tell you, they would come to me with, situations, et cetera, et cetera. And as I was the guy who took down Pete Rose, I also pushed George Steinbrenner out. I was, last story, he wanted me deposed, okay? Because he had been deposed and his lawyers had been, well, anyway, they agreed. They were going to give him 4 hours to depose me, and the meeting was going to be at 30 Rock. Okay, so 1 o'clock. So I get over there about 22, quarter to 1, and I go up to this former federal judge was the hearing officer. And I go up to his office and said, well, I'm ready to go. He said, well, you'll never guess who's down in the meeting room. I said, who? He says, George Steinbrenner. I says, oh, like this. So George and I had kind of that's another book, a really interesting situation, But anyway, we go down and George is getting a Coke. He's by the refreshment table in the meeting room. And I come up behind him and I touch him on the back of the shoulder. He says, George, thanks so much for coming. And he looks at me, oh, yeah. What he did was he had 8 attorneys, Michael, 8 attorneys were gonna question me. And I'm telling you, Paul Curran, Bob Gold, he had hit his row. I mean, they're all top of the line, former United States attorney. Unbelievable, the cast of characters. And I'm sitting at the end. I had my attorney, John Dowd, a colleague. He was my guy. And we started a thing, and they got and he took a chair and turned the chair around and was at an angle at the other end of the table, staring right at me, as almost trying to intimidate me. And I was, I have to tell you, I'm a professional witness. I'm cool as a cucumber. I know I try to do everything right. Not that I was perfect, but I knew I worked hard on whatever I did. And he's staring me down. I testified in traffic court, misdemeanor court, and felony court, in federal court. I testified twice before the United States Senate. So I have been there, done that, got a T-shirt. And he sat there through 4 attorneys who didn't lay a glove on me, okay? And he knew it. After the 4th attorney, he jumped up, threw his chair to the wall, and stormed out. And Judge Tyler, he was the judge that was here, the former retired federal judge. And Tyler says, well, gentlemen, I think it's probably time for a break. And he went out. We went in the men's room, and my lawyer is saying, Kev, you're unbelievable. I said, I looked, checked the toilets to make sure there was nobody still in there. And I looked at my lawyer and I said, I feel like Muhammad Ali. I'm floating like a butterfly and stinging like a bee. And I said to the lawyer, I don't want to get too confident. I still have 4 more to go. But I did fine. Because, Michael, I didn't bend any evidence or do anything like that. I just told the truth. And George had done the wrong thing with some bad guy by the name of Howard Spira and tried to frame David Winfield, and it was wrong. And it was my job to get the truth, and that's what I did.
So there it is. I mean, there was so much information, we could actually have a part 2. And interestingly enough, in his role as an NYPD officer, he did get involved with some of the mob guys, but not too many. It was totally my era when he was on the street. But the guy has a lot of good information to add about what's going on today. And maybe we'll do that in part 2. But I love Kevin. He did a lot for me early on in my release from prison. He gave me something to really start to think about as far as a career was concerned. And seeing that I had, a pretty good impact on the players, it motivated me to move further. And here I am 25 years later. So that's it for today. How do I always leave you? Same way, people. Be safe, be healthy. God bless every single one of you in this crazy world that we're living in today. And yes, I'll see you next time.